The death penalty is cruel, unjust, and has no place in any society. Last year, in the midst of a deadly pandemic that took countless lives, the Trump administration resumed federal executions for the first time in 17 years. What followed was an unprecedented state-sanctioned killing spree, unlike anything we'd ever seen in this country. In only 7 months, the Trump administration executed 13 people. That's more than the total number executed over the previous 6 decades. A horrible and ruthless legacy to leave. In Trump, we saw the worst example of what a change in power could bring, which is why it is essential that Congress legislate to fully end the death penalty, codify its abolishment into law, and prevent a future president from reinstating it down the line. State-sanctioned murder is not justice, and the death penalty goes against everything we claim to stand for as a nation. And at a time when more states across the country have outlawed the death penalty than ever before, more Americans oppose the death penalty, and over 70% of nations across the globe have abolished it. We must follow suit and do what's right. Death penalty action is calling on members of Congress to pass my Federal Death Penalty Prohibition Act of 2021 to abolish the federal and military death penalty once and for all. It's what the people want. It's what the nation needs. And it's what we must do.
Welcome, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today. It's a big day of action in Washington, D.C. We're really excited to kick it off with all of you. And we're just waiting for one of our panelists to join us. In the meantime, I don't know, Richard, would you like to say any words about today and what we're looking forward to?
Sure. It's really an historic day in a number of ways. Of course, it's Martin Luther King Jr. Day and a day to reflect on racism and civil rights in this country. It's also an anniversary of the first execution after the death penalty was abolished and then reinstated by the Supreme Court. That decision that stopped the death penalty was 50 years ago this year, not this day. It was later. But our emphasis today is on the federal death penalty, and I think that's very appropriate. The emphasis has been on states abolishing the death penalty in places like Virginia a year ago and other states, but the federal death penalty has reared its head and is, as the video that was just presented showed, it is a dangerous, as long as there are federal prisoners on death row, they could be executed. And there's some misunderstanding about the federal death penalty. It certainly applies all over the country. And even though most of our states have either abolished the death penalty or have put a hold on executions, and the federal death penalty still applies there. It applies in Michigan, where it's in the Constitution not to have the death penalty, in the state constitution. It applies in Washington, D.C., where voters came out in large numbers to end the practice of the death penalty in the District of Columbia. It can be used in Puerto Rico, where the people are adamantly opposed to the death penalty, and they've tried to get the death penalty many times, in the federal death penalty in Puerto Rico, but the juries have rejected it each time, and so there's a lot of danger that this practice, this executions, this federal death penalty, can be used anywhere in this country, and it can be used anytime that the president and the attorney general so wish. So it's significant, and I think appropriate that the demonstration will move from the Supreme Court, which bears some of the responsibility to the Congress and the legislature, to the president. They can have an impact here. They can, one or the other, commute the sentences. That's the president, so that they can never be executed. Those 44 people who are on federal death row can never be executed if they're commuted. And the Congress and the president can together end the federal death penalty as an act of legislation. Supreme Court could determine it to be unconstitutional, but that may take more time. Federal death penalty suffers from a lot of the same problems that the state's death penalty suffers from. Most of the people on federal death row are people of color. It's used arbitrarily. There's pockets of the country where the federal death penalty seems to pop up a lot. And you can also see, of course, the arbitrariness in no federal executions, 17 years, and all of a sudden, as the election gets close for re-election for President Trump, all of a sudden there's these federal executions. It seems to be a clear political act rather than an act of the justice system. So the arbitrariness, race, of course, the costs are enormous. There's so many problems. Even mistakes are made. When President Clinton was leaving office, he commuted a federal death sentence because there were strong doubts about the inmate's guilt. So all of that is a background for what's happening today. And although I've been there on other occasions, both snowed in and COVID in here, but I welcome look forward to hearing from some of the other panelists here as well.
Thank you so much, Richard. Welcome, Magdaleno. I'm glad you could jump on with us. You're muted right now. If you want to unmute and just say hello and introduce yourself.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect.
I'm Magdaleno Rose Avila, better known as Leno. And I've been like the other people that are on this group here today, involved in human rights and capital punishment. I was having a little trouble getting on here because I'm in Mexico, in Tijuana, doing some border work with immigrants here. But I think what's important about, and I have a long history of death penalty. Laura, I don't know whether I should take this over, or you keep introducing people, or how do we do this?
Feel free to take it over if you're up for it, but if you're not.
Good. Well, I think that just to give a little background before I introduce some of our other friends, is that I, like many of us, Dick Dieter and I are in that age group where we were young men when King was doing his great work. And he was the impetus for me to get out and become a full-time activist. His murder on in Tennessee years ago activated me as a student, and we changed our university, and I continued to work on the issues that were of concern to him. I did have the pleasure, I'd never had the pleasure of meeting Dr. King directly, but I was able to work with Coretta and her kids, and when I was in with Amnesty in Atlanta, and with Joe Lowry, who was then president of Southern Christian Leadership Conference. And their voice was very important on the death penalty. And they came out and spoke on a regular basis, and Coretta found her own grounding once Doc was gone to become a strong voice for the death penalty. And now her children carry on in that vein. So we want to hear from the other people, and then we'll have just sort of a discussion amongst ourselves. Austin, can we go to you next? Introduce yourself a little bit to everybody.
Will do. Thank you very much. My name is Austin Sarrett. I teach at Amherst College and have written about the death penalty for a long time. On October 13th, hearing the case of United States versus Tsarnaev, the surviving Boston Marathon bomber, the United States Supreme Court's conservative justices signaled that they will reverse a soundly reasoned federal court of appeals ruling and reinstate Tsarnaev's death sentence. The case not only challenges our legal process, it also tests President Biden's promise to work to pass legislation to eliminate the death penalty at the federal level. Now, it's no surprise that conservative justices favor the death penalty and would appear unresponsive to Tsarnaev's appeal, but it's surprising and disappointing when President Biden's Justice Department would join in asking the court to reinstate Tsarnaev's sentence. The stakes in this case go beyond his life. Underlying every death penalty case, I want to remind us today, is the very vibrancy of our form of government. The challenge that capital punishment poses to democracy is an underappreciated underpinning of efforts like today's to end the death penalty in the United States and at the federal level. Capital punishment is a vestige of monarchical prerogatives, which allow a single person to decide who lives and who dies. In today's world, autocrats love capital punishment and use it to crush and intimidate political opponents. Visiting upon so-called enemies of the state demonstrates their dominance. According to the philosopher Michel Foucault, the ultimate expression of sovereign power is the right to take life or to let live. For would-be dictators, merging the death penalty with unconstrained executive power is a marriage of considerable convenience. Check out leaders around the world who crave the power to kill their enemies. Hungary abolished the death penalty in 1990, but its current strongman, Viktor Orban, wants to restore it in the European Union. Roberto Duarte, the autocratic Filipino president, wants to bring back the death penalty to his country as part of his brutal war on drugs. China, Iran, Egypt, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, none paragons of democracy, lead the world in death sentences and executions. At home, former President Trump, this nation's most autocratic president, was also, of course, a death penalty enthusiast. He rushed, as we all know, to kill 13 death row inmates on his way out of the White House door. We've seen dictators' love affairs with the death penalty before. On February 27, 1933, 4 weeks after becoming German chancellor, and the day after the Reichstag fire, Adolf Hitler had the death penalty authorized for arson. In 1934, Soviet Union dictator Joseph Stalin made the number of executions a state secret in an effort to hide the full scope of his purges. By contrast, in a country like ours, built on the principles of individual life and liberty, the death penalty has no place. Hence, from the start, the death penalty there's been something not quite right about the death penalty in America. Benjamin Rush, one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence, described the death penalty as, quote, the natural offspring of monarchical governments. An execution, he said, in a republic is like a human sacrifice in a religion. The finality of the death penalty has always made it seem anomalous in a society whose checks and balances acknowledges human susceptibility to error. Capital punishment is the ultimate assertion of undemocratic infallibility. Today, people like Brian Stevenson have shown that our court system makes more mistakes than it cares to admit. They also teach that death sentences fall unequally and deny the dignity to executioners and executed alike. As much as it is proper to be concerned for the dignity and suffering of people condemned to death in an unjust manner, we need to remember that how a society punishes reveals a lot about who that society is and who it wants to be. That is why it is time for our first openly abolitionist president to join in supporting the abolition of the federal death penalty. As former Supreme Court Justice William Brennan once observed, when the state punishes with death, it denies the humanity and dignity of the victim and transgresses the prohibition of cruel and unusual punishment. Ending capital punishment, Brennan continued, would be, quote, a great day for our country and also for our Constitution. Working to end the federal death penalty is one way in which we can heed Brennan's admonition and end the death penalty at the national level. Doing so would not only save the people on death row, but it is necessary to revitalize our democracy and to ensure that we are not a society of killers. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I'd like to go to Suzanne Bosler, and then we'll hear from Reverend Jack Sullivan, and then we'll have a little discussion amongst ourselves as part of the program of reacting to each other's comments. Suzanne Bosler, who's a member of Murder Victims' Families, a great spokesman and active in death penalty action. So Suzanne, it's nice to see you on this important day, on King's Holiday, and please join us and give us your comments.
Yes, good morning, everyone. I think you can clearly see where I am today. I think you might have seen this last night. We can do it, and we will do it to abolish the death penalty. But I'm also going to start off by just another sentence about Journey of Hope from Violence to Healing, which Bill Pelkey, the founder, started us out with this wonderful group organization in 1996, which we have been going across the world to share our stories and to deliver what we think is wrong with the death penalty. For instance, it was in Florida in 1986. I watched my father get stabbed to death, and I was also stabbed, left for dead, but I was blessed to be alive and work the next 10.5 years to get the man who did it off a death row and in for life. And I am honored to work with all of you as a joining team together. There's one of us in every country and every state. And right now I was supposed to be there with them on the steps, but here we are still joined in another way. 5 years ago, I happened to be up there when they were going to do the sign on the steps and get arrested. And I was there with the meetings and everything. And I said, no, I wasn't going to do it. I was nervous, this and that. But finally, at the last minute, as they can tell you, I decided to join the 17 people. So there was, I think, 18 of us that went up there to hold that sign that I was so very proud to be a part of. And when the experience was when we got arrested, it was another approximately, I guess, 31 hours of being arrested and being in a jail cell that gave me time to really think about things because there's not much else to do. But I was blessed in the fact that it, to me, made me stronger to work together with you all as a team to abolish the death penalty. And so here we are today, 45 years, as they said. And I am as proud as ever to be with you all. We all do our own work, but we all work together in our own way, and we will abolish the death penalty very, very soon. I also noticed that our friend Rick Halperin is not here. And I'm just going to say one thing that stuck out with me when I read something that he said was basically, America should honor Martin Luther King's vision by halting the death penalty, which we are all with him strongly and always will be until it's abolished. So blessings to all.
Thank you, Suzanne. I think it's very important for Suzanne's voice to be there and also to remember a good friend, Bill Pelkey, who I met many years ago when he was coming out of the courthouse, when he was working on saving Paula Cooper, which people didn't think that was possible, but he wouldn't give up like a lot of people. And for those of you who are listening, there's nothing special about Suzanne or Dick or Austin or any of us. We're just local folks like you who decided to stand up, and in standing up, we've been able to find our voice and speak and learn more about how to convince people about this action. So one of our calls, as King would do it, is to ask the people who are participating with us in DC and over the internet to consider taking a stronger role, because this is really what it is. King would talk about, he's not worried about the words of his enemies, but the silence of his friends. And we can no longer be silent. And this is an issue we can win on and begin in the further destruction of capital punishment. Now I'd like to introduce a good friend to our movement and an activist who is with Journey of Hope and with Death Penalty Action, and a good friend to all of us in this movement, the Reverend Jack Sullivan. Jack?
Thank you, my brother, and good morning to everyone assembled in Washington and across the country and perhaps even the world. It's a privilege to join you via Zoom today. I had actually hoped to be with the activist colleagues and friends of mine who are in DC today, but I had a plethora of King-related activities scheduled for today here in Ohio, and I thought it best that I be faithful to those and stay here. And then when you know what, a snowstorm came today and blocked everything I had planned to do here in Ohio. So I'm in my living room next to my dog with the heater on, wishing I were with all of you in DC. But I've been to DC before. I've, of course, taken part in the Fast and Vigil every late June, early July with several of you and so many others who are not on with us today. But I've joined my voice with the voices of others from around the country and world who have dared to stand or sit in front of the United States Supreme Court and say, stop the death penalty, don't kill in our names. I am a co-victim. My baby sister, Jennifer, was murdered in Cleveland, Ohio in 1997, a case that is yet to be solved. And, but Jennifer was, I'm sorry for my phone ringing in the background. Jennifer was 21 years of age and just coming into her own. And there she was, killed in her own home with her 2-year-old daughter in the home. So we don't know what the 2-year-old daughter saw, but there she was. But over the years, I have considered ways that I could honor Jennifer's memory and her life among my family and her friends. And I've concluded over the years, just as I conclude now, that honoring Jennifer would mean speaking out against the death penalty in any function that robs another human being of her or his life. And I have always, and I'll punctuate that today, that whether a homicide is committed on a Cleveland, Ohio street or in a prison in Ohio or Indiana, homicide is wrong. Executions are morally bankrupt instruments that are hollow. They give no one any closure. They don't restore anybody's families. They do not help us grieve. They just continue the vicious cycle of human-led death. And they're violent acts. And here we are on Dr. King's birthday, the federal holiday. And I must say, as a King scholar, I did my doctoral research largely based upon King's work. There is no credible way to honor Dr. King's life and ministry that does not include a credible and visible and vocal stand against hate and against violence and against death. And so for those who would honor Dr. King today, especially those who are lawmakers, I hope that they find it within themselves to condemn capital punishment as being consistent with their tributes to Dr. King. Here's a quote from Dr. King I want to read to you about violence. "Through violence, you may murder the hater, but you do not murder hate. In fact, violence merely increases hate. So it goes. Returning violence for violence multiplies violence, adding deeper darkness to a night already devoid of stars. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that."
That's great.
Now, I'm going to stop in a moment here, but I thank you. It's a wonderful quote from Dr. King. I used to think it was naive to talk about love in the context of social justice and ending the death penalty, but I don't feel that way anymore. Love is powerful. And of course, we all know that no one's talking about a romantic kind of love, although that has its place. Amen, it does.
All right.
About love that looks for and works for the greater good, the good of every individual, of every zip code, of every nation. Love. And I believe, as the great theologians have said, that love, when lived out in the public sphere, is the practice of justice. And so I am convinced that the work to abolish the death penalty is an act of social justice. And as a Christian man, it's an incredible act that's consistent with those who follow and build their lives on Jesus Christ of Nazareth. So I am excited about this day, about the movement that we're part of. I believe our time has come. This will be a moment for us among several that will lead us toward the promised land of the United States federal system without capital punishment. And it may it be abolished also in the remaining states where it continues to exist. I'm happy to join you all today.
Great. Thank you, Jack. Just reflecting on King, and he was really the impetus, along with the farm workers, that got me to develop my own sense of nonviolence and love. And people always ask me, how can you love your neighbor? Well, I was unlovable at one time when I was violent and crazy, and people still love me and brought me around. When Dr. King was killed in standing up for the garbage workers, the movement was not popular. It was a difficult time for Southern Christian Leadership Conference, for Dr. King, because years before, he had come out about two issues that people were not happy that he was talking about, which was about poverty and about the war on Vietnam. But those were moral issues that he wanted to talk about. So when Dr. King was killed 4 days after he was murdered, as many of you know, Representative John Conyers of Detroit introduced the first Mlk Birthday Legislation, and he continued to introduce it, and more people signed on as the years go back. But on a snowy day Dr. Jack in Washington, D.C. in 1983 on his birthday, I drug out my family, my son, my brother, and my wife and I. We went out in this great little soft snow storm that we had in DC, and we were on the east side of the Capitol, and John Conyers had organized the demonstration that day. My boy said, should we demonstrate in the snow time? And I said, it's the right time whenever you can get people together. And we were surprised to have 250 people there. And the choir director for that day was Stevie Wonder, who sang Happy Birthday. And so we were there, and I've run into other people as I talk about King who were there also on that day in 1983 when we were demonstrating. And I'm saying this because you have to keep lifting your voice. John Conyers didn't give up on the King holiday, and neither did a lot of other people. And it took us almost 20 years to get it. So that fall in 1983, Ronald Reagan, of all presidents, signed the bill making the MLK Day a holiday. And that's the way we got it, because people were persistent. And that's the way King would like us to be on this thing called capital punishment, especially what should be an easy turn for politicians to take is to eliminate the federal death penalty. Because we know a lot of these state prosecutors where we've abolished the death penalty, some of them get in office, want to kill people, and they find a way that maybe they can inch a case towards make it a federal death penalty case. I always wondered, because it wasn't easy for me to go out and demonstrate even after Dr. King was dead, because I had never demonstrated before, but people told me I should talk about race in America and violence in America. And I always remember what people say, well, what are you doing with your life? And I said, well, I'm trying to live by some principles, because Dr. King would tell us, you know, it's not really how long you live, but what you did when you were alive. Everybody wants to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But he says, you should take your advantage of your time on this earth to do the right thing. It really doesn't matter how many degrees you had, how many friends you had with money and influence, if you did not use that for poor people. And he would remind us, it doesn't matter how long you lived, but what you did when you were alive. And all of us should continue to remember that King lived his life, and we must carry on in the name of King and all the other civil rights workers who are part of that movement. So now I'd like to ask our panelists if you want to react to anything that our other friends have said, so that we can just join in an open discussion about thoughts that we'd like to share with folks. Anybody? You can raise your hand or just start talking. Dick, go ahead, brother.
Well, yeah, I certainly related to a lot of what you were just saying, Leno. It brought a lot of memories back in 1972, which is 50 years ago, when the decision came down to temporarily, at least, end the death penalty. I was part of a group called Community for Creative Nonviolence, my wife and I, and our focus was the Vietnam War and protesting and getting arrested sometimes and fighting that. And Martin Luther King, he was the civil rights leader, and that was another struggle we related to. But our focus was Vietnam. And when Dr. King came out against, the Vietnam War, he connected those issues. He helped us to see that these, the injustices that were going on overseas, but at the hand of the U.S. was also related to the racial injustice right here in our own country. And CCNV and for a number of reasons started working on issues right there in DC, and soup kitchens and medical clinics for the people who needed them right here at home. I think the connection among various issues is an important point that we learned from Dr. King. And the death penalty is one of those issues that it's symbolic. It goes to the heart of who we are as a people. If we're willing to kill those who've made terrible mistakes, that trickles down to all our imprisonments and our ways of seeing people and dignity of humankind and a lot of other things. That's why I think it's so important that whatever other work you're doing, give some nod to the death penalty. Or if you're full-time working on it, wow, great. But if you're doing other things, find ways to talk to people. We've got to talk to people who don't agree with us. We have to talk to prosecutors. We have to talk to those in law enforcement. We have to talk to victims, victims' family members. Suzanne was very eloquent in her position. Some victims' family members support the death penalty, but there's a message that they can hear. And the death penalty is so fraught with problems that it need not be a partisan issue at all. So that's kind of my broad take over these past 50 years. We've made a lot of progress, but we still have a ways to go, both in the states and on the federal level. And of course, as Austin said, around the world. So let's keep at it.
Dick, I'd almost forgotten what a troublemaker you've been over history. So, because we needed the people to stand up on these issues. And even when we were standing up against the war, wasn't popular. It wasn't popular in the Chicano community, Mexicans. And we had to convince a lot of people. And we did. And when we're talking to you here today, some of us have been involved a little bit longer, is that we're looking for other people to take up the banner and lead us, because we don't think we have all the wisdom you need to win this issue. We want to be a part of it. But I was regional director of Amnesty International from Fudge. It was like 88 to 92 or something around there. I was trying to convince Amnesty members that should be involved in fighting capital punishment. And I was Southern Regional Director, and it really caused a conflict for some of our members because of the racism that we encounter in the South. And while they were comfortable fighting against the death penalty in South Africa or Cuba or someplace else, they were not as comfortable about standing up in the South and as Amnesty International. And now Amnesty is one of our great partners in this effort. So I've got what I thought was my youth leadership. I brought him to Atlanta, Georgia. And I asked Steve Bright, who's historically one of our great attorneys on capital punishment. I said, could you send somebody over to help me educate the Amnesty members? He sent over a young intern by the name of Brian Stevenson. And one of his first public talks that he gave on the death penalty. And I was impressed even then by him. And who would have known that Brian Stevenson would come out and do all of the things that they've done? When I met Bill Palkey, I didn't know Bill Palkey would do all the great things that he did. And he got inspired by coming to an Amnesty meeting to do even more. Abe Bonowitz, I met in the Amnesty movement, who's head of one of the co-chairs of Death Penalty Action. All of us have been inspired by other people to do great work. And we have to keep opening the doors. When we were arguing the McCleskey case, which is a case on race and the death penalty, with Keith Jennings, who was he's an African-American brother that passed this past year, was one of my organizers. We decided to have a meeting in Atlanta, Georgia, Pasco, Dr. King's old restaurant and hotel, and talk about the death penalty. So we invited, we had the McCleskey sisters there. We had a lot of the leadership of the civil rights movement of SCLC. Coretta Scott King was there. Ron Hampton, we got the police, National Black Police, to come out because we knew Ron, and we called him and we said, well, what's their position on the death penalty? He said, well, I'm against it, but we have a board meeting tonight. Let me ask them how they stand on it. And they came out against it because we politely pushed them. And our principal speaker was John Conyers, who got to come from Detroit, because he really, in the old days, was head of the Judicial Committee and did a lot of work on areas dealing with the judicial system. So we were there, and it was a great gathering. And some of my friends in Amnesty will say, well, what if these Black people become uncontrollable? They go outside of our mandate. I said, well, somebody's got to become uncontrollable. This is wrong what's going on in America. And we have to stand up, and whatever it takes, we have to do it. But I think we have to do it with love. That's what I always say. That, if you want to arm yourself with the facts and with love, and you'll be able to talk to a lot of people. Anybody else from the panel like to chip in?
Yes, I wouldn't mind saying a couple things that people reminded me of. Dick reminded me of how victims like myself have gone through more than just the experience. I had to go through 5.5 years of forgiveness to be able to, forgive the man and work harder to save his life. But I also wanted to point out on her lapel is one of Bill Pelkey's buttons that says love and compassion for all humanity. And so this is what we all have to work with. Victims, all of you have some kind of form of where we're going. It's like a pie. We all have a part in this. But I also, I think there's 42 scheduled for the death penalty coming up. And I was also honored to be with Abe and other people in the 1000th execution, Kenneth Boyd in North Carolina. We got arrested there also. That was an interesting experience. But we will all go forward, and it looks like we're going to start our thing. So blessing.
For love and for life, and everything that we do, we're trying to spread that.